Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this week's Monday Zen and Zazen class. Today I want to start my talks about Shunryu Suzuki's Zen mind, beginner's mind. So we will do this bi-weekly. Next week I will talk about Sawaki Roshi's To You, and then in 2 weeks I will return to Zen mind, beginner's mind. But before I start my talk, as always, let's sit together for 30 minutes. Thank you for joining. So today I would like to start to talk about Suzuki Shunryu's famous book Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. I think it was first published in 1970, and Shunryu Suzuki came to America in 1959, and he died 1 year after the book was published in 1971. So he stayed only 12 years in America, but he's the first one who, well, the first one isn't really correct, but among those teachers who actually taught Zazen, he was the one who had probably the biggest impact. The reason why I hesitated to say the first one is, well, of course, the first one to actually talk about Zen and write books about Zen was D.T. Suzuki. He came to America, I think for the first time at the end of the 19th century, actually, to a religious symposium in Chicago that was held at the time in 1890 something. And already at the beginning of the 20th century, D.T. Suzuki started to live in America. He married an American woman. He was pretty fluent in English language, so he gave a lot of talks and wrote a lot of books. But I never heard that D.T. Suzuki actually taught how to sit or that he gave any sessions. So for some reason, for D.T. Suzuki, although in his books he says clearly that Zen is not about theory, that you need Satori experience. For some reason, he didn't think it was worth to actually try to teach people the practice. Or maybe he thought that the sitting practice is not so important, that you can get enlightened without sitting. And you can sit for 10, 20, 30 years and still you don't get enlightened. So maybe for D.T. Suzuki, the practice and enlightenment were maybe not so strongly related. We don't know, but for some reason, D.T. Suzuki didn't actually teach the practice. But there were two Rinzai teachers that started to teach pretty early. One of them lived in California and his name was Nyogen Senzaki. I can't tell you exactly when he started to teach, but actually he also belonged to it was a group of Rinzai monks that first visited the US. And D.T. Suzuki, although he was not a monk, he was a layman. He was part of that group. And another member of this group was Nyogen Senzaki. And there's some books by him, but I think they were published maybe even after he died. So he wasn't so much of somebody who would talk about Zen, but he had a sitting group. But as far as I know, he only taught his students to sit on chairs. So at the time, it was still before the war. He thought it's impossible for Americans to sit on the floor. And another name, one of the early Zen pioneers, is another Rinzai master. His name is Soke-an, and he lived on the East Coast in America. And I think he died already in 1945. I'm not quite sure when Senzaki died, maybe in the 1950s. And both of them are pioneers of Zen, but Suzuki Shunryu was the one who really had an impact. Maybe also in the 1930s, 40s, 50s, people weren't ready yet. Maybe the 60s were kind of the time of the hippies where people were more curious and also more kind of willing to maybe experiment with drugs, and that got them into these crazy enlightenment experiences. Today, maybe first of all, I want to talk about the title, Beginner's Mind, Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. It's in English, and then about some things that are said in the foreword. Let me share the screen with you. So that's the PDF that you can find on the internet. And what you see on the left side, in Japanese, you would read it Shoshin. And beginner's mind is a quite accurate translation of that. Left of these two characters, Zenshin, that would be Zen mind. And then there's the name, Shunryu. Um, Let me first talk a little bit about these two characters. Shoshin, the one that was at the top, sho means to begin something, to start something. It can also mean first, the first mind. And if you want to say beginner in Japanese, maybe it's the same in Chinese. I could imagine it's the same in Chinese. You have to add a third character, which means person. So the Japanese word for beginner is shoshin sha. Sha means the person. A person with first mind, a starting mind, a curious mind, an open mind, the mind of a child, so to speak. So maybe it's not super important, but it's interesting that in English it's the other way around. Beginner is kind of an easy word, and then you have to add mind to talk about the mind. In Japanese and probably in Chinese, it's the other way around. First, you have the word for the mind of that person, shoshin, and then you have to add something to make it into the beginner. So, shoshin means first mind, an open mind, a curious mind, a free mind. And one of the famous quotes from this book, I think it's already the subtitle of the first chapter, is in beginner's mind, there are many possibilities. In the expert minds, there are few. So beginner's mind is a mind that's not tainted yet with knowledge. And there's a Korean Zen teacher called Sung-san, and I think one of his sayings that also became a title of his book is only don't know. Don't know. Or I think he was also talking about this mind that's not knowing. And I think it's basically the same idea. The mind that has no clue, that's the one that's closest to enlightenment. While the mind that knows something, the mind that has grasped something, is actually not Zen mind anymore. And that's even true for the mind that thinks, I got enlightened. I have this experience. In this moment where you think you got it, you lost Shoshin, you lost the first mind, the beginner's mind. And I could imagine that it was, how do you say, an eye-opener for many of us in the West when we first heard about this beginner's mind, and also maybe a little bit of relief. That's one of the things that I think his name was Houston Smith. There are two forewords. One by a professor called Houston Smith, and the second one by Richard Baker, who was one student of Shunryu Suzuki, and he was the one, the Dharma heir, we call it, the one who became the second Zen master at the San Francisco Zen Center and at Tassajara, their mountain center. And in the first of these forewords by Houston Smith, it begins with the word, there are two Suzukis, DT Suzuki and Shunryu Suzuki. And DT Suzuki, how did he say? He was extraordinary, he was amazing. Let me look at the text for a second. He says, whereas DT Suzuki's Zazen was dramatic, he calls DT Suzuki's, the Zen that he's talking about, dramatic. And he says, Shunryu Suzuki's Zen was ordinary. D.T. Suzuki's Zen was about Satori. In his books is where we first learned about this word. And we also learned that you can't explain in words what Satori is. You need to experience it firsthand for yourself. But then again, D.T. Suzuki didn't teach the method, how to get there. He didn't lead any sessions. He didn't give doksan. He only wrote about Satori. He gave talks about Satori. And what I got from his books, it's a very, very small number that really got it. Maybe 5, maybe 50. But it's a very small number of truly enlightened masters that hand this Satori down to their students. And this has something very mystical. And what was special about Shunryu Suzuki is when you first have the wish to sit and you have no idea about the rules in the dojo, you have no idea about who Dogen is and what is written in the Shobogen, so you have also no idea of Satori. Actually, in that moment, when your mind is completely fresh, that's when you're closest. You don't need to get another Kensho. You don't need to get another Satori to finally have the mind of the Buddha. And what I also like about this foreword, it's at the end of the foreword, Houston Smith says, at one point he asked Suzuki Roshi when he was with his wife, how come you never talk about Satori? D.T. Suzuki said so many things about Satori. How come you never talk about it? And his wife said, well, because he just doesn't have it. And Suzuki said, don't tell him, don't tell him. And they all had a big laugh. And the foreword by Richard Baker is also quite interesting, but I find it a little bit disappointing because in his foreword, Richard Baker says, well, the mind, in this book, we find the mind of Shunryu Suzuki, but not his ordinary mind, but the Zen mind. The same mind of Dogen Zenji, the same mind that Gyoku Un So-on Dai-osho, or I don't know, some Japanese teacher that nobody has heard about. So for me, what Richard Baker tries to do that is put Shunryu Suzuki up again. He's not just some ordinary guy. He's in a long tradition of Chinese and Japanese masters. And I understand the wish to have him there and to be able to compete with D.T. Suzuki, who was probably until then the most famous name in the game, so to speak. But I find it a little bit, well, disappointing that Richard Baker, at least to my mind, he's kind of giving in to this temptation to make something special of your teacher. I understand that you want to do that. You want to turn your teacher into something special, but when I compare these two prefaces, although one is written by a professor and the other is written by an actual Zen teacher, in this case, for some reason, I prefer the preface by the professor. Okay, so much from my side for today. I will start in 2 weeks to actually talk about the text by Shunryu Suzuki. But if you have any questions or anything you would like to share, you're welcome to do so. Any questions? Yes, Tanya, please.
The story you just told about this wife of him when they have the big laugh, and was this about D.T. Suzuki or Shunryu Suzuki?
That was Shunryu Suzuki's
Yeah,
wife.
because you said the other one. You said D.T.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, okay. I was just confused because I knew it the other way. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So his wife said, Shunryu Suzuki, he doesn't have Satori. That's why he's not able to talk about it. And Shunryu Suzuki told him, don't tell anybody. Anything else you would like to ask or share? Nothing? No questions? Tanya, another one, please.
Yeah, I understand your feeling about the forward. I got in touch with Richard Baker a little bit in the last 1 or 2 years, and I think he had to become wiser. He was I think he was a very young guy when he became the Dharma heir, and so I think he had still lots of things to learn, and I hope he finally did, because now he has the young Dharma heir, which is a woman my age, and so I'm confident he now sees maybe it's time to give it to a female kind of leadership, and I appreciate his choice, even when I think it's not good to be too young to have such a responsibility. Yeah, okay, thank you.
Yeah, I can imagine that it must have been very difficult for him, especially in the beginning, because, well, his teacher was, 12 years active in California, but probably most of the students only knew him the last couple of years. I don't know how many of these 12 years Richard Baker spent with him, but they all looked up to, Shunryu Suzuki. And although his Zen was ordinary, he was kind of, the Japanese master. He was wearing the robes. And when one of us Westerners is wearing the robes, okay, it's the same robes, but it looks more like some funny cosplay. You don't have the same authority. So for the guys in the Sangha, they are Shunryu Suzuki. He was ordinary but also special. While Richard Baker, there was nothing special about him. Or I'm sure there were lots of things, lots of special qualities he had, but people didn't see him, and he was young, as you said. He was young, so he somehow you want to create this authority for yourself. And the easiest way is to transmit authority to your teacher. He's special. He has this mind that was handed down from Bodhidharma to Dogen Zenji and Suzuki Shunryu, and I got Dharma transmission. And of course it's stupid, and it of course is totally opposite to beginner's mind. In the beginning, you feel, you need to do that. Otherwise, it's very hard to actually function in the role of a teacher. So I could imagine that happened to Richard Baker, that he somehow wanted to fill the shoes of Suzuki Shunryu, Roshi, but he had difficulties, he felt. Yeah.
It's such a short time, only 12 years of practice, and
yes, it's not a long time.
It's not a long time, and
no. And I mean, if we had Buddhism for, I don't know, 100, 200 years already, and then there's one teacher 12 years, that's another thing. But there's this completely new thing in America. Nobody really knows the whole kind of cultural context. And then only 12 years, it's a very short time. It's a very short time. Yes. Joseph is raising his hand. Joseph, please.
Thank you. Kind of two things to say. First question, if it's not too personal, Muho, but how does this thing about making the teacher special in your mind, did you do that yourself with your teacher? Do you recognize that in your own history?
Like
And
what
I
I
guess kind of,
just said. Mm.
and
Pardon? Yeah.
no, sorry, I just got a weird message from Zoom saying I've switched to a different language. It doesn't matter. And the second question is, can it be useful sometimes to have that kind of attitude, like if it helps the student to give them strength or courage to carry on when they feel lost in their practice, even if it may not be true, can it be useful to have that attitude towards a teacher?
So when I spoke about, well, maybe Richard Baker found himself in this situation. Of course, I was also talking about my own experience 25 years ago when I, out of the blue, became the abbot of Antalya. I was only 33. I just turned 34 years old. I was very young. My teacher died when he was only 52, so he didn't become so old. And of course, at that time, nobody looked at me as well, the abbot of Antalya, kind of. There was this strange German guy who somehow won the lottery, or nobody knew why did he become the abbot. I didn't really know by myself, but somehow I ended up the abbot. So of course, you asked if it's helpful. Well, the problem is, if you're just some Dharma buddy for everybody else, this kind of teacher-student relationship can't really work. If you present yourself just as a buddy, like, if you have any questions, you can always come to me, but you need a certain authority. The problem is it doesn't work with you claiming it for yourself. You can't come and say, I have authority. I'm a sensei, I'm a roshi. That's just ridiculous. So it takes time. So in my case, I was the abbot 18 years, and it was only in the second half, after I invested a decade or so, that people started to realize, wow, this guy has done this job actually for 10 years, or you could feel it. Basically, you have to grow into it. And it doesn't help to somehow try to, how do you say, replace these 10 years that you need. And I don't mean 10 years as a student. You need those 10 years as well, of course. But then 10 years as a teacher, where you have to kind of somehow develop the authority, and then you can present yourself totally naked as an ordinary guy, and you will still have the authority, because it's an authority that comes from the inside. But when your teacher has just died, you find that you've just finished the funeral, and you have to fill the shoes. There is this temptation to say, well, I'm the Dharma successor, but it doesn't work. It doesn't work. And I'm not quite sure how successful I was in avoiding this temptation, making this claim that I'm the true heir of my teacher in Antaiji. But at least I try to be aware of the danger, and try to be aware that it would be stupid to say, well, I have a special Zen mind that's transmitted from Shakyamuni over Bodhidharma and Dogen, and from my teacher to me. And if you want it, the only way you can get it is by becoming my students. I hope I was pretty clear that that's not the way it works. But on the other hand, whenever I had the feeling that people were just kind of looking at me as a kind of Dharma body, and even though they spent 3 years, 4 years, 5 years in Antaiji, they didn't really study with me as you would study with a teacher. I had the feeling there was something lacking for them. So even though you shouldn't say, I'm the teacher, it's necessary that you find students that for them, you are the teacher. You are the teacher. But again, that takes time. It takes time. There is no use saying my teacher was a Roshi and I'm a Roshi as well.
Well, thank you for your question, Joseph. Sorry to interrupt. I think I can agree with the first part you said. You said maybe it's sometimes helpful to put the teacher on a chair or to, yeah. In my case, I think it was helpful, but I realized right from the start what is happening there, this ideal teacher stuff. And for me, it was helpful to be encouraged or to stay with it, or to with all these difficulties. And for me it worked. Yeah.
I'm not quite sure if I understood you right. You said it's important to put the teacher on a chair or on a pedestal, you might say maybe in English, and you said for you it worked. What I try to say is it doesn't work if the teacher is doing it by himself. If the teacher puts himself on the pedestal for the students, that doesn't work.
No, I agree with that. I referred to the first part of Joseph's question when he said maybe it can be helpful for a time or sometimes to put the teacher up on a pedestal to get encouragement or something.
And yeah, I agree with that too. Yeah.
But it's just a image in the mind, and I reflected on this right from the start, and so I was fine with it because I never felt I'm worth less as a human as my teacher. She is the big Zen teacher, and I'm just the little one down here. I never felt that way. I think it was a kind of, or is still sometimes kind of mother projection. And I was fine with it because I knew I needed it from a psychological point of view, and I was happy that I could live it in this way without a real danger, because I knew it's not. It's just my mind who's needing this right now, and as long as it helps me to be honest with myself on the cushion and not. To be honest with myself, as long as it helps me with this and supports my sitting practice, I was fine with it.
Very interesting, Tanya. You could say maybe like as long as you recognize it's part of the game, to use the language we often use here in this group.
So if I may inject myself into the discussion again, there's this kind of game side in this projection, the ideal father or the ideal mother, and you want to be seen, you want to be acknowledged by your teacher, get the attention that maybe you didn't get from your parents. And that I would call an extension of the game. And that might maybe also necessary, sometimes even helpful, but I think that's something we should get beyond very well as soon as possible. Some people might need it, and sometimes the teacher might, how do you say, provide that too. Although in Antaji was more the guy that said, I'm not your father, I'm not your mother. But then there's this other side that when it comes, how do you say? In German, you would say hard on hard, when it gets really serious with your practice. There's this point where your teacher says this, but you think that. And if the teacher is just a Dharma buddy, why would you listen to the teacher? If you think that, you should do that. But in Zen, there's no use having a teacher if, when it comes hard on hard, you basically follow your own ideas. So you need to give so much authority to the teacher that even in this situation, even if what the teacher says totally contradicts your ideas, okay, then I follow the teacher. Without that, using the metaphor of the game again, I think you need that not as part of the game, but this helps you to break out of the game, your own personal ideas, your personal, the game that you play. So that aspect, I think, is a really important aspect. The other aspect, and probably they're connected. It's not that they're completely different aspects. I guess they're connected. But this, I look up to the teacher like the perfect father, the perfect mother that I never had. This I would call more kind of an extension of the game, trying to gain all these points that I couldn't collect as a child. And that's kind of maybe not dangerous. It must not be dangerous, but can be dangerous. And that aspect, I would say, try to grow out of that as soon as possible. But still, it's important to give authority to the teacher. Otherwise, how can you completely let go of yourself?
Yeah, I agree with that. I was sure quite right from the start that this is an illusion, this projection, and I sometimes fight with my own projections, and so I have to learn to acknowledge them, that they are here, and maybe they try to help me, and I'm not sure in which way they want to help me, and I often find myself fighting with this kind of things I know from my mind conceptually I have to overcome, because I will get stuck if I don't overcome them, and I will want to pull to get them, to get rid of them. Yeah, and I agree with this authority stuff, because when I met my teacher, I was sure I want to go this Zen way, to follow her, and I tried to meditate all the time. And then one day she told me, "Why don't you become a mother?" And I said, "No, I won't come for a session so often. I will not be able to." And she said, "Well, then you live with your master." And I wasn't sure about that, but I somehow trusted her. And the first years of motherhood were not the way I expected it. And I think still it's not the way I expected it, but I am fine with it. And I know it doesn't contradict my Zen way, but at first I really thought it's contradictory to my Zen way, and my heart was bleeding, because all people I knew went to a session and I was at home with this baby, and so I was really suffering. Okay, thank you for listening.
Thank you for your questions. Thank you for sharing. Anything else you would like to ask or share? Nothing? Well, we are already over time. So if there's nothing else, I would say let's finish for today. Next week, I'm going to be back and we will talk about Sawaki Roshi's quotes from To You. And then in 2 weeks, we start with the actual text of Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. Okay, thank you for joining. Have a nice week. And thank you especially to Schwan for hosting us here. See you. Goodbye.
Bye.